All right, let's get right into it. The story we're unpacking today, according to our source material, starts way back in 1988. Picture this, a tiny New York office, just 8 people. And from that small room, the claim is a 35-year plan was set in motion. A plan to, well, control the entire world.
And this right here, this source says this is basically the unofficial motto of the company at the very center of this story. It's a really interesting phrase, right? It hints at a strategy that isn't about owning everything outright, but about being so influential that you're just everywhere.
Fast forward to today, and that company, Blackrock, is said to be controlling assets worth a mind-blowing $11 trillion. To put that in perspective, they hold huge stakes in the companies that basically run our lives. We're talking Apple, Google, Microsoft, you name. And yet, and this is the real kicker, the source claims 90% of the world has never even heard its name. So that's the big mystery we're diving into, right? How can one company be that powerful, influencing everything from your phone to your bank account, and still fly completely under the radar for most people?
You know, the source paints this really dramatic picture to drive the point home. Imagine the global economy is in total freefall. The President of the United States, the most powerful person on the planet, who's the first person he calls? It's not the CIA, it's not the military. Nope, he calls a private citizen, a man named Larry Fink, the CEO of Blackrock. And why? Because the source claims he has something way more powerful than an army, something they describe as an algorithm to control the world.
So to really get how Blackrock got to where it is today, the source says you have to go back to the beginning, to the story of its founder. And this isn't your typical business school case study. No, this is framed as a story of revenge.
Okay, so the source traces BlackRock's entire existence back to one single massive failure. Back in 1986, Larry Fink was a Wall Street superstar at a firm called First Boston. But then came the Black Monday crash of '87, and everything changed. He made one bad bet, lost his firm $100 million, and just like that, he was fired. The source frames what he did next not as just a comeback, but as a calculated act of revenge. After a short-lived partnership at Blackstone, Fink goes off on his own in 1992 to create Blackrock. And he's determined, absolutely determined, to build a company where one mistake could never, ever cost him everything again.
And how is he going to do that? Well, to prevent another disaster, the source says Fink decided to take human gut feelings completely out of the equation. He hired a bunch of mathematicians and scientists to build him what he hoped would be a financial crystal ball. The result was Aladdin, and the source describes it as something more than just software. They call it the world's first financial AI, allegedly designed not just to predict crises, but, and this is a huge claim, to actually manipulate the markets.
Okay, so this brings us to a massive turning point, the 2008 financial crisis. According to the source, this was the moment that took BlackRock from being just another Wall Street heavyweight to being an absolutely essential, baked-in part of the entire global financial system.
You know that famous saying, never let a good crisis go to waste? Well, the source claims BlackRock didn't just adopt that saying, they turned it into their entire business model. Every single crisis became a golden opportunity, not just for making money, but for gaining more and more control over the system itself.
So when Lehman Brothers collapsed and the whole system was teetering on the edge of the abyss, who did the U.S. Treasury call? Larry Fink. And the deal they made, as the source alleges, was unlike anything seen before. BlackRock was apparently given the keys to the kingdom, full access to the Federal Reserve's secret financial data, and the contracts to handle all those toxic assets, you know, the bad loans that were poisoning the banks.
Now, this is the really crucial part of the story, the central allegation. BlackRock supposedly unleashed Aladdin to figure out what all these toxic assets were really worth, bought them up for pennies on the dollar, and then had the government pay for them. So when the market finally bounced back, those worthless assets turned into pure gold, making BlackRock billions. The source basically concludes that Larry Fink didn't just save the system. In their view, he bought it, making the U.S. government totally dependent on his company's technology.
So that crisis basically set the stage for everything that followed. Now, let's break down the specific methods the source claims BlackRock uses today to keep and even grow that power.
The source boils it down to 4 main strategies: the power of the shareholder vote, something they call the ESG weapon, the revolving door between DC and BlackRock, and a crisis playbook they can use over and over again. To really get the mindset behind all this, the source points to this direct quote attributed to Larry Fink himself. "Behaviors have to change. We are forcing behaviors."
That idea of forcing behavior is supposedly at the core of tools like ESG scoring. That stands for environmental, social, and governance. Now, on the surface, it sounds great, right? But the source argues it's used like a weapon. Companies that get a low ESG score get cut off from funding, which basically forces them to get in line with BlackRock's agenda. The source calls this whole system controlled capitalism.
Then you've got the third method, what they call the revolving door. The source points to a whole bunch of connections between the US government and BlackRock. I mean, when the same people who are making national policy have deep ties to one single corporation, the source basically asks, isn't that a massive conflict of interest?
And finally, we have the crisis playbook. The source points out a pretty striking pattern here. 2008 financial meltdown, BlackRock gets the call. 2020 COVID crisis, BlackRock gets the call. 2023 banking crisis, you guessed it, BlackRock gets the call. The source really makes you wonder, is this just a coincidence, or is it a repeatable, planned-out strategy?
Okay, so that's the past and the present. But what about the future? Where is this all heading? Well, the source material lays out what it claims are BlackRock's big plans for the global economy.
And at the heart of this vision is this really infamous quote, which the source connects to a World Economic Forum presentation involving Larry Fink. It's a vision for a world where we move away from an economy of ownership and into one where we subscribe to and rent pretty much everything.
Now, a huge piece of this alleged future is the big push for something called central bank digital currencies, or CBDCs, and BlackRock is supposedly advising central banks all over the world on this. Here's the difference, according to the source. Cash is anonymous, but a CBDC, every single purchase you make would be traceable and potentially controllable. They argue your account could be monitored, or even just frozen, remotely.
The last piece of this futuristic puzzle, according to the source, is something called tokenization. This is the wild idea of turning every real-world asset, your house, your car, your savings, into a digital token on a giant ledger. What does that mean? It means your house isn't just your house anymore. It's a digital token that maybe hundreds of different investors own a tiny piece of. The source argues that if everything you think you own is really just a digital token, well, that's how you get complete central control.
All right, let's pull all these threads together. What's the ultimate point the source material is trying to make? It's really about a fundamental change in what power even is.
Basically, the old ways of thinking about control, they're becoming obsolete.
And this, right here, is the key takeaway from the source material. They argue that real global power isn't about having the biggest army or the most money anymore. Today, real power is about controlling the data, writing the algorithms, and owning the very infrastructure that quietly shapes all of our decisions. It's a much quieter, almost invisible kind of control.
And so, our look into this source material leaves us with one last, big, provocative question. In a world where data is power, and that power is held by just a few, who holds them to account?